Okay, everybody, I think we can go ahead and get started. I first just want to say thank you for joining us. And on behalf of the ACEDS Houston chapter, welcome to AI and Machine Learning, top 3 ways to use AI and machine learning on every matter. My name is Jean Rivers. I'm going to be your moderator today. I'm an e-discovery project manager here at United Lex, and we've got some amazing panelists joining us today. I'm going to start with Charles Duff. He is the longtime e-discovery and investigations enthusiast, focusing primarily on understanding, applying, and teaching advanced AI and machine learning techniques and workflows. At all phases of the EDRM at Reveal Brainspace, he is responsible for helping clients understand the full power of many forms of AI and how it can be applied to structured and unstructured data to gain insight quickly, make better, faster, and more informed decisions for their legal and investigations matters. Prior to Reveal, Charles helped create and design the direction of 2 e-discovery platforms, then spent 6 years as senior solutions architect at Brainspace, where he helped lead expansion in legal, federal, financial, life sciences, and energy enterprise markets across 5 continents. Welcome, Charles. We are super happy to have you here. And next we have my colleague here at United Lex, Aaron Cruz, who is the SVP of Analytics and AI. He is the former e-discovery partner at Littler Mendelsohn, always have trouble saying that, former senior associate general counsel and head of e-discovery at Walmart. So thank you guys for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here today and share your education and insights. We are super excited to have you. And with that, I'm just going to jump right in because we have a limited time here. So let's talk about, why does AI and machine learning matter at all? I'm doing things the way that I've always been doing them, and they seem to work perfectly fine. So why do I need these concepts? And I'm going to let Aaron start us off here.
Thanks, Jean. Thanks for having me. So at a really high level, the issue is, well, there's a couple, but the biggest issue is the flow and the type of data, right? There's more and more data, and there are more and more types of data. And humans reviewing that, based off of keywords just doesn't work that well anymore. You really have to leverage the tools in order to get through the data, the size of data that we are dealing with today. But then also to deal with different kinds of data that really aren't subject to the type of search and analysis that has driven the e-discovery process for the last 10 years or so. And those upper limits eventually make things very, very expensive if you're going to try and get through all of it. It also generally means that you're leaving a lot of value on the floor. You're leaving a lot of insights on the floor. You're leaving the ability to actually cleave through and find things that maybe you didn't know you should be looking for on the floor. And it results in a process that is neither efficient nor effective in the way that technology can drive. Charles, is that fair?
Yeah, that is, I like to think of it as, how much is your time worth, right? And very much in line with what you just said, Aaron. I like to think about the implementation of these technologies as sort of 2 things that all investigations, the e-discovery process during litigation, sort of come down to. You're always trying to do 2 things. And these 2 terms that I'm about to say, historically were used in sort of the TAR predictive coding world. But I think it applies to just about everything we do. And that's recall and precision. And at a very high level, recall is essentially, get me the good stuff, right? Get me the relevant data, or documents that are pertinent to certain issues, or privileged data, or private data, whatever it is that you're looking for. And then the precision side means, get me only that data, right? As much as you possibly can. There will be a certain number of relevant documents that are going to be in your data. And if you look at everything, as you just alluded to, there is so much data, it's ever growing, it's only going to get bigger. The teams are not growing, the budgets may not be growing. within law firms and corporations, right? And so you need the analytics world to counteract that, right? To be able to present and represent what that information is back to you in certain ways, like the visual analytics, like a concept search, present predictions back to you that end up mitigating the items that you just mentioned.
Yeah, that completely aligns. Sorry, Jean, just stepped on you.
No worries. Can I have one of you, because I think this is an interesting aspect and something that we don't actually talk about a lot, but how using these tools can help us to counteract human bias.
Charles, you want to tackle that one first? I'll come.
Yeah, sure. I think, yeah. The primary way that what I think about from a workflow perspective and using a certain AI machine learning technology is I think about keyword augmentation, because most of the time you're going to have some sort of text that you come with, information that you come with into an investigation or litigation matter. And you're going to use that text to search for whatever it is in that data. Now, if I don't, it's really twofold, right? A, we need to understand that more and more studies have come out over the past 10 years for sure that help us realize that these computer algorithms not only are very, very good, on par, and sometimes even better at finding resulting relevant data as humans are, but we can also use that to augment what we currently know. If you think about the process, the iterative process of I have some keywords, I search within my data, I retrieve the documents, I batch those out for review. There might be some additional fact development that goes on, right? And over time, I'm going to learn more about that case, but it took me reading a lot of documents to get there, right? And so right there, you're counteracting your bias, but it's through doc-to-doc review. Let's try to do that as early as we possibly can. And via concept search, like I mentioned, keyword augmentation, and something like a concept search, I can ask the technology, the algorithm, what it knows about the data that I don't know, right? And retrieving that information at all is a very good thing, but retrieving that information is early in the process is a major reason, and maybe the most major reason to immediately start using AI algorithms.
Yeah, I back that 100%, Charles. I think one of the other pieces of bias, which I think you alluded to, but I think is worth calling out, it is not abnormal for teams to have kind of keyword lists, if you will, and they deploy those in every single case, right? And we know for a fact that keywords are both over-inclusive and under-inclusive at the same time. And deploying kind of your same set of keywords over and over and over again across cases really robs you of the ability to rapidly explore the data and see what else is there that you might not be anticipating, or things that, and understanding those nuances can actually drive fundamental understanding of what the case or the investigation is about, and can do that right out of the box, which means the rest of your strategy is then geared toward or facilitated by knowledge as opposed to the application of experience, right? I've done 25 of these cases. I know how they always work out. We do it like this. That has value to it, but it also blinds people to a whole swath of what may be in the data because they're not looking at it from an orthogonal perspective.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that a little bit, there is a cascading effect that happens when you gain insight quickly and early on in the process as you possibly can. If I make better, more informed decisions early in the case, I get my review started, in a much better way. So let's say richness in the batches going out to my review team, the proportion of relevant to non-relevant data goes way up, right? So I find additional insight quicker. My review team is probably reviewing quicker because they're seeing more relevant, less non-relevant. You're not wasting their time with non-relevant. If you're using something like predictive analytics, like supervised learning, that process is made much better by more informed decisions early on. And then naturally, the overall fact development and time to production and close of the case is much quicker. So implementing these tools as early as you can, I think is key.
Well, and if I can double click on part of that, Charles, I think the other piece of it too, bigger than just your document review, understanding fundamentally that key set of facts, right? Unearthing that really core set of documents at the very beginning of a case. It also allows you to structure a discovery strategy that is very intentional and is really designed to get you the information that you need but don't have. So if you take the corpus of what you know at the very beginning of a case and you lay that against the essential elements of the causes of action that are involved, and you say, what else do I need to understand here in order to make an assessment of this matter? You can do that with in a very direct course kind of way, as opposed to the much more meandering process that happens when you don't leverage these tools early on. So you can literally build very, very quickly a corpus of knowledge that allows you to say, we know all the pertinent parts of this case and can move this onto a path toward resolution, right? Or we have some gaps in what we need to know, and that becomes the focus of discovery, as opposed to an unfocused discovery episode where you may be asking a lot of questions, or the other side may be asking a lot of questions about things that are effectively established. And that, it wastes time, it wastes money, it wastes resources. And quite frankly, it wastes cycles, right? It keeps people from being sort of their strategic best and brings them way down into the tactical that may or may not have significant value.
That's right.
So there's so much to cover here. I'm sure that you guys could both write a book about this. So let's talk about, for our audience, like what is the really important stuff? And I think you guys both kind of touched on this a little bit, but let's start with the difference between supervised and unsupervised learning. Charles, can you take that on for us?
Sure. Primarily when we're using these AI algorithms in the legal and investigative space, we're primarily talking about two sort of overarching forms of machine learning called unsupervised learning and supervised learning. And they're kind of exactly what they say they are. So unsupervised learning would be something like a cluster wheel. It would be something like the building of a concept search, where when you put a term in, something happens in the background and you're presented information, right? Even something like entity detection, PII extraction, all of these are forms of unsupervised learning because they happen automatically. You put your data in, a bunch of things happen, the information that is built is represented back to you in a wide variety of ways to help you gain insight. Right? It primarily works off text and metadata. Most do not work off the natives. So that's very good. It's very fast, right? And the fact that it happens automatically is key as well. And you typically want to use the unsupervised learning. This is changing a little bit. We might talk about this here in a few minutes, but typically you're going to use unsupervised learning first. To gain insight because of the data maps, the cluster wheels, the dashboards, the communication analysis, any sentiment and emotional analysis. All of this information is ready for you as soon as you get into the case, right? And so you'll typically draw a lot of facts from using what you know and augmenting that with what is actually in the data, right? And that's the unsupervised piece. The supervised learning, it's in the sense that it needs some direction, right? And that direction primarily comes, there's really two forms, but it primarily comes in the form of tagging. So I tag a document as relevant, responsive, hot, relevant to a certain issue, et cetera. And the machine will take metadata attributes, the text and phrases and concepts that are within the text, and even derived attributes, like if the record is geared towards negative vocabulary or pressure-related vocabulary, or other derived metadata, like if there's company names and people's names in the body text itself. So it can take all of that information and it says, well, you said this record was valuable, so let's go find more like that, right? And this other record was not valuable, talking about people playing golf or whatever it is. And let's sort of suppress documents that are geared more towards that vocabulary. Now, that's a very high level look, but you do that a few hundred times as you tag the results of what you found during the unsupervised learning. As soon as you begin tagging them, then you can start to use the supervised learning and have the machine go rank the entire rest of the data set. And you want to use that to feed the review going forward, right? And those algorithms are constantly updating the scores on your data based on new information coming in, which would be the additional documents that are tagged, let's say every few minutes, right? The scores are recompiled based on what is now tagged at that time. And therefore you're constantly giving out the most up-to-date, likely to be relevant, yet untagged documents to a review team. The other major form of that would be pre-built models, which do not require tagging. So what an example of that is something like a reveal software where we have a model library where you might have a privileged model. The reason that those models can be built without tagging is that they're curated over time and they look at more sort of generalized vocabulary. They look at how humans speak, right? What does a advertising and promotion document look like so that I can identify it for junk early on in a case? What does bribery look like? What does privilege primarily look like, right? And it's a way to get started to rank all records for that particular type of behavior or vocabulary as soon as you put the data in. And then you can combine that with the results of the unsupervised learning. And then from then on, your predictions will take over and you might do a more traditional batch out the highly ranked data, right? So unsupervised is show me what I don't know and augment what I do know, find some good facts quickly. And then supervised is when I say something is important and not important, give me more of the good and less of the bad.
Okay, and so I think that you touched on this just a little bit as far as the data that feeds these different workflows. But Aaron, can you tell us a little bit more about structured data versus unstructured data and some of the issues that we may see with unstructured data?
Yeah, so I mean, unstructured data, quite honestly, is what we're used to playing with in eDiscovery. Right. I mean, that's a lot of these tools. I mean, unstructured data is things like email, things like text messages. It tends to be highly communication based. Structured data tends to come out of systems of some kind or another, and it tends to be sometimes word based, oftentimes word based, but it tends to have a lot of numerical quality to it. Structured data can be things like event logs coming out of systems or application logs coming out of systems. And a lot of times we need to use slightly different tools to get through structured data. But the interesting part about the way this works is we can roll these tools together in ways that are very, very powerful. We can use the insights that we derive from the unstructured data look to help guide how we review structured data in an ancillary space, right? And it helps bring an understanding, a holistic understanding of what we're looking at. So if you think about the way I often kind of think about structured and unstructured data, structured data tells us what happened, right? And the unstructured data tends to tell us how people were talking about what happened as it was occurring or afterward, or how they were feeling about it, thinking about it, like what is the context. So if you think about structured data a lot of times is fact and event, and unstructured communication data is the context around those facts and events. How are people perceiving it? How are they talking about it? What were their motivations? What were they trying to do? And if you think about applying that in the course of a legal matter, the structured data gives you fundamental facts. This is what occurred. And then that communications layer, that unstructured layer, tells you what people meant by it, why it mattered, why they cared, why they were doing it. And so it allows you to put together those fundamental pieces that help you tell your story. And so it's very, very important. It's very powerful. And historically in e-discovery, we leave the structured data component on the floor because we have been very, very focused on the unstructured piece because we were able to get that most easily. It was top of the tier, and the tools were built to deal with that.
Thank you. That's a great point. I never actually specifically thought about it that way. Thank you for that. So let's move on to transparency in the technology and process, because a lot of the times these, big word technologies are kind of like the Wizard of Oz. It's all happening kind of behind the sheet. And so tell us a little bit more about what's happening behind the sheet. Charles, I'm just going to pick on you.
That's okay. So I think, typically there needs to be, some sort of a elucidation when both using unsupervised and supervised learning. But I also think it's important to understand that that's not set in stone. There doesn't always need to be sort of a defense to an opposing party or a regulatory agency in certain circumstances. Now, the person using it, you absolutely want to know what the technology is doing, sort of how it's doing it, and the process in which you use it, and be able to document that and recreate it, right? All of those things are very important. When you look at unsupervised learning, understanding, at least from a high level, companies can't give away all of their secret sauce, right? But there are many white papers, many documented examples from, many different technology firms in our space. I would definitely read up on those if you are looking to use more of these types of analytics. Just get your head wrapped around it a little, and document what you need to. And something like a concept search that is typically difficult to be able to state to another person what exactly you did. Some tools are black boxes for sure. But some allow you to have the actual query that was written in the background, even though you just clicked the button, right? And you can document that, and you can recreate that at a later time. Something like a cluster wheel will have maybe a certain unique identifier that you clicked on and said, these documents are the ones that I want to look at, and you can document that as well. And so the combined effect of the documentation from, let's say, more like white papers, more educational literature from the companies themselves, making sure that you understand what's going on, and then using any output or report to document not only what you clicked on, but the process to get to the end result, right? In something like a supervised learning, this comes up probably, it's one of the major aspects of supervised learning that comes up because if you look at like a TAR1 or true predictive coding workflow where you use let's say, a control set to identify certain estimated richness. I won't go too much into these things, but the end result might be that you decide that you are not going to, and for very good reason, you're not going to review X number of documents, right? This pile of documents I'm going to set aside. And you can do that because of the way that case law and the entire industry has agreed is not only okay, but extremely valuable, right? But there are also, especially with the predictive analytics, what we call the supervised learning, you can also use it as something as simple as a sorting exercise. You sort by near duplicates and email threads and custodians and dates right now. You don't have to defend that process. And if I were to sort, not exclude documents from review, but just use it to sort, and there are many reasons to do that, then at that point, there's not necessarily a defense that needs to be made.
Thank you.
Rich? Jean, can I double click on that really quick?
Absolutely,
before
absolutely.
we move on? The way I sort of view this, right, is there are multiple ways to leverage these technologies, literally to use them like a lever, right? From like a high school physics exercise. I'm going to use them like a lever in order to move a mountain of work. And one of those pathways is prioritization or sorting. Thinking about, let's try and get the most relevant stuff to the top so we figure out what matters as quickly as possible. And we're able to really get a handle on that, maybe start producing documents to the other side, and really start to engage in this process of fact-finding in a very fulsome and very intentional way. And then there is the other method of using it, the other lever, the other type of lever, which is being able to exclude documents, to say, there's a bunch of stuff we're not going to look at, we're not going to spend time, we're not going to spend money on looking at it, because the chances of things that matter being in there and not encompassed in this other stuff that we've already found is so appreciably low that the juice is not worth the squeeze, right? And to Charles's point, I think from a prioritization standpoint, you don't need to defend that. You don't need to go out and push on that. You can and should be doing that aggressively. And then to the extent that you're excluding things, that's where sort of the more traditional processes start to kick in, and the conversations that opposing counsel need to have with each other and those pieces. That's where those really start to land. And so it really is a question of how much bang for the buck are you going to get from exclusion, right? And how far are you pushing that exclusion envelope such that you have to go and defend that or explain it, versus really just leveraging the technology so that the most important stuff gets pushed to the front so you can find it quickly and start to really engage in that fulsome fact-finding and communication process.
Thank you, Aaron. Charles, did you have something? I'm sorry.
I just wanted to, so we have a question from Alex in the Q&A. He asks, what makes a case a good candidate for leveraging AI? Are there certain conditions or questions you can ask to determine that? In all honesty, the title of this panel is using AI on every matter, right? But if I have 100 documents, I might just look at them, right? If I have 500, I might take a little bit of time and go through them. But if I have any more than that, then in my opinion, there is zero reason to not use AI. And coming up with Jean's next area of this discussion, we're going to be talking about exactly why that is.
Well, and so just expanding on that a little bit, even in a data set where you have like 500 documents, and you were just going to put human eyes on it, I would actually still argue that something like doing a heat map of where those documents came from, like who are the people who are in those documents communicating with about concepts that are potentially relevant to the litigation, that can be incredibly powerful, even when you have a really small set of documents to start out with. That leveraging the, before the humans had a wheel, we dragged stuff around on sleds. And these tools are like wheels. They make us faster. They allow us to carry more work, more load with a smaller group of people and in a smaller amount of time. They allow us to invest fewer resources to accomplish more. And so, even with a very small document set, pushing it through something like a brain space to say, who are these people talking to that may not be in my data set, but that I actually really might need to go take a look at because if they're having these communications with those people and those communications are relevant or germane to the thing I'm trying to understand, maybe I've cut my bucket too small and I actually need to expand that and think a little broader. Alternatively, I've been in a ton of cases where one side or the other is like, we want 28,000 custodians because we think we get to map the world. And the ability to put a small core data set into these tools and say, there is no reason to go after all of the custodians that you're asking about, because there are, in fact, only 12 people that are talking about things that are germane to this question. And here we can show you that. Here are the concepts that we looked for. Here is the heat mapping of who this core group of people is talking to. We don't need to go beyond that pale. Those by themselves are very, very powerful levers. And even a small data set benefits from that because it allows you to foreclose potentially expanding what you're playing with.
So what just happened is very important. I tried to put a number on it. And if you think a little bit more through it, you still can't, right? So again, sort of going back to, it's probably a good idea for just about every case.
Thank you. So, Rich, I think that thank you for joining us. I think we answered your question about unstructured data and metadata. If we didn't, definitely follow up. And we will follow up to let you know about access to recording of this event. I want to move into the second half of our presentation so that we can get to way number 1, 2, and 3. But
Gene, really quickly, one thing for Rich, and Rich, this might help, thinking about the dichotomy between structured and unstructured data, some examples might help, and specifically in the context of certain kinds of litigation, right? So in the area of labor and employment litigation, especially big like wage and hour class action kind of litigation, the way we historically litigate those cases is to search email for communications about the hours policies and how people are clocking in and how hours are being written off and stuff like that, and to look for time policies and stuff like that, and then to look at time punch data and pay data, right? Time punch data and pay data structured because they're coming out of a system and they basically say Aaron clocked in at 8 o'clock, Aaron clocked out at 5 o'clock, Aaron clocked in at 8 o'clock, Aaron clocked out at 5 o'clock. And Aaron got paid, however much money for those 8 hours, right? Bang, bang, bang. Aaron took a lunch break. Aaron didn't take a lunch break. That structured data piece tells us the what. The theory about the communication, the unstructured piece, is it tells us how people were applying the rules or how they were thinking about that. The thing that people miss a lot is that there is a whole structured data component that is beyond like time punch data and pay data. And that structured data component is structured data that comes out of all of the systems that people in modern business have to be in order to do their jobs. So, in a pre-COVID world, you badged into a building and then you logged into your system and you maybe logged into your email and your soft phone and your Microsoft Teams and your a SharePoint site and whatever your like Salesforce or something like that. You don't actually need to see the content of what's going on in there to see whether or not people are active in the systems that they need to be in order to do their jobs. And if you can get that system, that structured level data, and you can layer that structured level data to say, here's what a person's day actually looks like. They're active and they badge into the office, they log into their systems, they're active in the systems that they need to be in to do their fundamental job. And then they go dark for an hour and a half, about 11 o'clock, they come back at 1. They're active in the systems they need to be in order to do their job for another 3 or 4 hours, and then they clock out and they're gone. I can make a very strong argument that that structured data actually tells me a lot more about when people are working and what they should be compensated for than the time punch data that doesn't actually reflect activity. And that when we take that system level structured data and we layer it with something like time punch data and something like pay data, we get a very fulsome view of what people were doing and whether they were fairly compensated for their work. And that fundamentally gives you an answer to a question in a major wage and hour class action.
Thank you for expanding on that. So we've got about 20 minutes left. I want to make sure we get through our way number 1, 2, and 3. But before we go, I just want to say very insightful first half, but the juice is not worth the squeeze is what I am going to take with me when I leave. I've never heard that before. Okay, so way number 1, fact finding. Aaron, do you want to go ahead and jump on this one for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about kind of the fact-finding process, a complaint comes in, you know absolutely nothing about the case. You're shocked by the allegation, right? You had no heads up about it. There's been no internal investigation. This thing wasn't even on your radar. Boom, here's a complaint. Where do you even get started, right? The traditional process is to kind of go talk to some people, figure out who might have been involved. Like that all works. But while you're doing that, as you identify the people you're going to go talk to, grabbing their data, thinking about what data would speak to the issues that are in the complaint, grabbing their data, throwing it into one of these tools, and using either specific language from the complaint as search terms or looking for concepts that relate to the things that are in the complaint, jumpstarts that fact-finding process. It lets you find a couple of kernels, a couple of documents that you can then lever off of and lever off of and lever off of in order to expand. So you can look for similar concepts, right? You can begin building models that'll go look for more of that type of information in a broader data set. And the reason that this is particularly powerful today is because in a kind of a 1.0 TAR world, you really had to have your entire corpus in there before you could really engage in these processes. Because if you added data, you had to rebuild that whole brain. And that took a lot of time and a lot of effort. But modern technology allows you to iteratively add data. So as you realize that the scope of your investigation or the scope of your custodial scope is expanding, you can start with a kernel and identify a couple of things that then become drivers for these models. And that allows you, especially if you're thoughtful about whose data you're looking at or what data you're looking at, you're very quickly able to identify those 10, 12, 15, 20 documents that if you were going to try this case tomorrow, right? If this was an episode of Perry Mason or LA Law or like pick your legal genre case here where in the course of 90 or of 60 minutes, right? They go from the accident occurs to we're having a trial. That doesn't occur anymore. Before the federal rules of civil procedure around discovery were promulgated, that kind of stuff actually did happen. You'd have a trial in like 10 days. That doesn't happen anymore. But we can get to the functional equivalent of that because we can find those key documents right out of the box, leverage those to find more documents and really fast track our discovery process. But more than that, we can surface those key documents to our in-house counsel who needs to make decisions about what they want to do with this case. Here's what this case looks like. Is it strategically important? Does winning actually matter? Or is this really a business exercise about how much money are we going to spend to get this thing to resolution, right? You can start to make those kind of decisions, which is why that fact-finding piece is so important and moving it to the very front. Everybody wants to slow down that fact-finding process. They want to do things first, but getting into the data first actually adds massive value all the way down the chain.
Yep, and on the practical side, the day-to-day usage side, Aaron mentioned complaint, informing the collection process. When we look at things like analyzing third-party productions, incoming data, right, we need to get a holistic view to be able to find information in that pile quickly as well. And even things like deposition preparation, right? If I, during a deposition, you want to come in with as many facts to inform your questions as possible, or give advice to your witness. And you can do that much quicker by implementing all of the different visual and text-based, like concept search analytics. And one major thing to think about, on the many cases that I've advised on, I kind of boil it down to 3 questions. What data do you have? Because that will inform or help inform what type of analytics you use. Do you have audio, video? Do you need that transcribed? Do you have image recognition? Do you need to know what's in those images? Very important for construction cases, maybe. Do you have a need for language translation, right? So what kind of data do you have? Chat, text, SMS, right? Those are becoming much more prominent. Certainly all forms of mobile data is. And so that will inform what you do. And then also, what information do you have, right? I like to just I have a slide that says this, it says, what do you know? Right? And that can be, it can be very little. And I might use something like a wheel or some sort of graph to show me concepts or terms and phrases that are in that data. I might start there. If I have let's say persons or organizations, domains, and I need to see who talked to who when, maybe that's more important than at least initially what they were talking about, because I don't know what they were talking about. So I might actually start at a communications graph, right? And if I do have any form of text, then I'm probably going to start at a concept search to augment my key terms, right? Give me the facts that I don't know about early, and also tell me which of my terms are potentially overbroad. How can I be more specific, more deliberate in my search terms, so that I don't bring back as many non-relevant data, because that's important too, right? We want the recall and we want the precision. And so mapping what you know and what you have, and then what your end goal is, like Aaron said, it's a business decision. What sort of case are we trying to make? All of those inform sort of the mapping of which of these AI tools you'll use during different areas of fact development.
So, Charles, if I can, you made a really interesting point. The conversation about opposing party productions. I've been engaged in a lot of litigation, either in an in-house role or at a big law firm, and it's astounding to me how much time and money we expend fighting about what the other side is going to search and get through and produce, and then the amount of that data that actually never really gets reviewed or looked at. It's because it's time prohibitive, it's cost prohibitive. You got your own client stuff that you're trying to get your arms around. So thinking about what the other side has is oftentimes kind of that afterthought piece. And the reality of this is, if we've done our data work on the front end, and we've built these models by going through, we've leveraged all the kinds of technology we're talking about to rapidly fact find on our side. When that opposing party production comes in, those models that we built and leveraged in order to get through our data are generally super applicable to that opposing party production, right? Because the conversation is about the same thing. And so like I said, we often don't think about front loading the data piece of this, so that when that opposing party production comes in, we've already done the hard work to build the models so that we can apply those models and rapidly surface out of that opposing party what do they have that we don't, that's important in order to fill out this picture.
Couldn't agree more. Let's go into way number 2. And I am going to ask Charles to start us off on review acceleration.
So I think we decided to include review acceleration in a top 3 ways on every matter, because I have heard so often that in a situation which does happen very often, I have a set of keywords. It's agreed upon either internally or in conjunction with opposing party. And I'm going to run those keywords and I'm going to get a set of results and I'm going to put eyes on those and that is it, right? So why would I ever use certainly predictive analytics for that, right? And if you think about what the predictions do, if I give you a score, right, and I say I'm going to rank every document from, let's say, 0 to 100, the higher the score, closer to 100, the more likely it is to be valuable. On the 0 side, it's not. Now, yes, it's sorting in likelihood of relevancy or having privileged information, whatever that model is looking for. But a really unique thing about using the predictive analytics, the scores, is if you sort by that score. So if I give you the highest ranking documents first, so typically we look at that as like a continuous active learning workflow, right? We're doing that because we want the relevant data first and we want to suppress non-relevant. Well, that doesn't matter because you just said you're going to review all of those documents anyway. A side effect, a very important side effect of that sort of review is that if I sort from top to bottom, yes, I'm getting the higher likely to be relevant first, but there happens to be an evolution of similarity across that entire data set. Similar documents will be scored similarly. And if I give you a document at the top and I sort and give you the next 100, document 1 will be talking about the same or generally the same things as document 2. And then it might slightly change to document 3 and slightly change to document 4 and so on throughout the rest of my batch, right? Now, the key there is throughout the course of electronic discovery review, we have sorted and batched out in a multitude of ways, right? Like near duplicates, by dates, by custodians, by email threads, maybe a combination of some of those, right? And part of the reason for that is, especially if you look at like email threads, it gives you a little bit more context, but certainly near dupes. If I give you similar documents back to back to back, you are likely to review them faster, so more documents per hour, because you're not having to change the context of your mind. If I have one subject on one document, another subject on the next document, I have to sort of reset, right? It may only take a couple of seconds, but that adds up. I have to reset what I'm thinking and determine if that document is relevant or not. And then also, if I give you back-to-back similar records, you're likely to make more consistent decisions on that topic on the topics that are in those records. So if I give you one document today, let's say there's a group of 4 near duplicates, and you're kind of on the edge, is it relevant or is it not? I give you one today and one tomorrow, you're likely to make, or at least more likely to make different decisions on the same type of document, right? And so combining those into one batch, especially where they're back to back, like in your dupe group or email thread is, you get the benefit of going faster, reviewing faster, and the benefit of more consistent tagging decisions, which is always good. Now, the reason the predictive capabilities, the score themselves, not the fact that if they're likely to be relevant or not, but simply by batching in order of the score, you get that exact same effect. And you get it on the entirety of the batch and the entirety of the review process. So even if I have the result of keywords, I can still batch by that score and I review faster and I have less errors as far as consistency of tagging on those records that may or may not be relevant. And so therefore, if you look at it that way, you can use these scores as an acceleration mechanism on every single case you ever review.
Yeah, and if I can, it's not just the application of prioritization. The other way to do this, right, even if you weren't going to use a continuous active learning engine that's going to prioritize the documents and scale them all the way up, the other way to do that is to use an application like BrainSpace to create clusters and then batch by clusters. Because again, what you're doing is creating similar tranches of documents so that your reviewers are in a single sort of headspace when they're moving through whatever that batch looks like. So again, this concept that these tools really do apply across basically all cases. Because even if you're not going to go the full blown, we're going to run this through an engine, we're going to look at everything, and so we want to prioritize the entire stack. Just saying like, hey, we just need to smash through this very quickly. And this is for investigations, like internal investigations, this can be a very, very powerful lever. Throw all the data in, concept cluster it, identify those clusters that just make obvious sense as potentially being relevant, batch those to your team of investigators, have them cruise through those in pieces, and then think about how you lever out what's useful to maybe go look broader if that's a decision that you make. But that's a very discrete, very low touch application of this technology that can have a profound impact on performance.
And one last note on that is you can combine that with other techniques as well. You can grab, if you're dead set on batching by family members, you can recursively sort of grab those batches, right? So I may say, give me my top 50 that are either a result of the scores or in the same cluster, and then their family members, right? And then their email threads. So you can still implement what you're used to, but you're getting the benefit of having this sort of evolution of similarity that accelerates and creates more consistency.
Thank you. So we got a few more minutes left. So I want to go ahead and jump into our way number 3. Aaron, can you start us off talking about our favorite subject here, privilege?
Sure. If you think about privilege, right, even today, a lot of folks use privilege screens. They're using keywords that are around privilege. Again, that over-inclusive, under-inclusive problem is particularly high touch. The other thing that happens is that inconsistency problem that Charles and I have kind of been touching on the last little bit. It is not abnormal for privileged documents to be treated inconsistently across either reviewers, right, or across days by the same reviewer. So thinking about how we identify and potentially cluster privileged documents is another one of these mechanisms that speeds things up. We can build models that look syntactically for the kind of words and communications that lawyers use. We can lever tools that look at people's role and the syntax that they're using in order to try and say, this person looks like they're in a legal job and they speak like they're a lawyer. So we're going to bucket their data as being, potentially privileged, and we're going to deal with that in a separate, more specific workflow. That is very, very possible. And then things like visualizing communication patterns to figure out who people are talking to. One of the things that gets missed in this privilege conversation a lot is the conversations that go back to like in-house counsel or lawyers, or the conveyance of advice that came from a lawyer and needs to go from a business person to another business person that is within the ambit of privilege, right? They necessarily need to know what that legal advice was in order to effectuate it. That often gets missed because it's a carryover conversation. And so leveraging tools that look for the types of language that lawyers use and think about who people are talking to can very rapidly help you stop missing things and help you tease out those privileged conversations and put them in a bucket where you can deal with them more effectively and more consistently.
And there's actually, we're talking about models here. There are pre-built models for this situation as well. The proper nouns will change, right, depending on the case. But the language primarily stays the same, right? And so we can apply a pre-built model looking for identification of that type of language that would be indicative of privilege, asking for advice, et cetera. And then we can combine that with the metadata, right? The derived attributes of, which metadata, which sender recipient domains are actually law firms, right? You can determine that and essentially get a list of law firms. And you might do something like combining the known information that you came in with the unknown information that you've learned from, let's say, high scoring records from the pre-built privilege model, also combined with a list of law firm entities extracted from the data. And the combination of those three things is very likely to get you started with a highly rich, most likely privileged set, right? And then that, as we keep mentioning, can cascade into, as you actually review the records for privileged material, then that will inform the model itself. Everything will update, and the entire workflow flows from there. It's quite brilliant, combining all of the unsupervised and supervised in the fact development, in the review acceleration, in the privilege.
Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. So that is way number 1, 2, and 3. We do have room for a couple of questions, but before we get to that, just want to let everybody know that this is just going to be the first of a series on AI and machine learning. So please be on the lookout for part 2 of this. Also, if you are not a member of ACEDS, look us up. You want to join. It is a great organization that is committed to promoting education in e-discovery and litigation support. So before we move on to questions, if you have to jump, we understand. Is there anything else, Charles and Aaron, that you feel like we missed and that you want to touch on really quickly before we take a couple of questions and let everybody go?
I think from my side, I would just reiterate, today was much more of a sort of high level, how to think about these technologies and where to deploy them across the life cycle of a matter. The following sessions will dig more deep and probably have maybe a couple more slides or live presentations. So they might, whereas things were high level today, the topics will certainly be more specific on the coming sessions.
Yeah, I would just double down on what Charles just said there. And we can go to questions.
Sounds good. So we did have a follow-up question from Alex. And Alex is asking, how can you leverage AI in short-term message formats chats? We see a lot of Teams data in our investigations, and I haven't been able to identify a good use case using AI.
Charles, take a swing.
Yeah, so that's it's very difficult for a multitude of reasons. First of all, the applications that hold that data are all over the place. There's so many of them. So retrieving that information is difficult to begin with. Now, when you are using, again, the primarily unstructured data, when we're speaking about how the terminology they use, the language that they use, when you're building a cluster wheel and concepts, it's all about the content of that data. And that changes when you get into these more short format content data, more acronyms, there's emojis, right? There's GIFs, and there's all sorts of information. And a record is no longer a record, right? A record, I don't even know if that exists anymore. You might have one message, but you really, because of the way that people go back and forth, you really need to understand the context of hours, days, weeks, right? And because conversations will sort of come and go in the same time frame or span of these Slack channels of a message group, a messenger group like for Facebook Messenger, it's very difficult to understand what constitutes a question and answer across a certain time frame. And so number one is to get the data in and then to understand how should we be looking at that, because a document is no longer a document. Well, you should probably be looking at it in the same form that you look at it on your phone, right? And when we run a concept search or try to derive metadata attributes from those files, how do we visualize that? If we need to run redactions or inverse redactions, how do we do that? And then if you need to produce that data, what do you actually produce, right? Do you produce a day's worth and redact what is not necessarily relevant? So there's a lot of issues that go into that. At its core, it's still unstructured data. And so the tools, in my experience, still work pretty well on the short message content. But right now, as we speak, new visualizations, new technologies, new way of review and redacting and producing these records in a sound, defensible manner, are being created. I would say use it now. I've seen a lot of success, but the industry does need to get better at that, and that is coming.
And if I can, some data science capability on the back end helps with that a lot, because if you can pull that data out and structure it so that you can actually push it through in things that look more like a document, that can also be really powerful, right? You can actually kind of bootstrap it, if you will, into the current tool application if you have that kind of capability available to you.
Thank you both. I just want to follow up once again, because we got another question that we will follow up with you all on where you can review this presentation once again. Rich, as far as your question as to whether ACEDS is specifically a legal industry entity, or will you cover other industries in the future? I don't really want to speak on that for ACEDS. But I will follow up with you on that. I don't think we have any other questions right now. I just want to say thank you again to Charles and Aaron for sharing your time with us today, and everybody who joined us in the audience. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.